you're a reenactor or a costumer, there are going to be times where you don't want to be completely dressed, but you want to be, presentable. We can't all just walk around our shifts all the time. I mean, you can. I wouldn't, but sure. I present to you the 18th century Banyan, or wrapper. Morning gown, sometimes nightgown. Sometimes something in French that I can't say because hablo español and my mouth doesn't work that way. For the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to just call it a banyan to make it easier on ourselves.
We are extremely fortunate that so many 18th century banyans exist in museum collections around the world, but we can also see a fair number of them in paintings from the period, especially those done by a certain artist. Check out that shot silk lining. If you've ever tried to make one of these items for yourself, you've probably come across this image. It's written in French, but I've translated it for us. It says, "Pattern of a dressing gown in one piece, except the ends of the sleeves, the two fronts, and the edges." Unfortunately, unless you're really comfortable with taking shapes and drafting them to your measurements, this isn't going to be very helpful for you. The same is true for this well-known image illustrating how to create a bedgown. If we place the image on top of a grid, it's going to be easier for us to decipher where we need to measure, where we need to cut, and therefore create a sort of pattern for it. We don't really need detailed measurements for this project, but there are a few things we can do to make this project go a lot smoother. Here I'm measuring from shoulder to floor on my mannequin. This is going to be the general length of the banyan. I'm also going to take her bust measurement, overlapping the tape quite a bit so that we have plenty of ease in this garment. We want it to be flowy, not fitted. Unfortunately, this mannequin was not blessed with arms, but I know the bedgown she's wearing fits an average-sized lady quite well. I've added a few inches to make sure the sleeves are not too bulky, but also not too tight. You have a few measurements. Now what? As I mentioned before, I took this image and placed it on a grid, so it would be easier for us to draft where our lines need to be. The measurements I took on my mannequin aren't perfect for this image, but they're pretty close. I went ahead and graphed my own measurements onto a new diagram for future reference, which I'll have available to download if you need it. Here we've got our sleeve measurement of 18 inches. The full bust measurement was 49. We're going to divide that by 2 and get 24.5 will be the width across the chest. We're going to take the shoulder to floor measurement. That will be the length of the banyan. We're going to divide that, multiply that by 2 to get 108 inches. This will be the full length of our fabric, which we will fold at the shoulder and cut on the fold to create one large piece.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay out our fabric, and basically we're going to cut the entire thing in 2 lines. Just trust me on this one.
Unfortunately for everyone involved, I did not line up this shot correctly, so you won't really be able to see what I'm doing. But before we get into that, please let me remind you that if you're using a cotton or linen fabric, please wash it and iron it before you get started. If you're using silk or wool, please don't wash it, but still iron it. What I'm doing is matching the selvages all along the length of the fabric, so that I can fold this into a magical rectangle that will allow me to cut out the banyan in only 2 cuts. Well, lots of little cuts, but 2 lines. Unlike the Flora cotton, linen does not rip easily. In fact, I would suggest you don't try. You can't really pull a thread for the diagonal cut, but you can mark it and pull for the sleeves and the center front.
So what we're going to do right now is attach the two little rectangles that we cut out of the extra fabric left over from cutting the side. I've already marked them to how long or how wide they need to be, and I've just made them the width of the sleeve that we cut plus 1/2 inch on both pieces, so that we have a seam allowance. When we sew these together and we fit it to the sleeve, it's going to be almost perfect. Pieces are sewn together. Sleeve, that's attached to the body. We've got the sleeve extension. We're going right sides together, match up the ends. So I'm just going to stitch this up, and then we'll move on to extending the sleeves on the lining.
Now that we have the main body of our banyan cut out, it's time to take a look at necklines. In this painting, the lady's wrapper is quite wide and open around the neck, much like the ladies' gowns of the time. There's no collar, and it seems as though it finishes with a simple turned hem. This bedgown I already have completed is finished in much the same way. It's curved around the front and has a shallow opening around the back. The best way to achieve this on your own banyan is to probably put it on and decide where you want the edges to fall. As you can see in the back, it bunches up quite a bit, so you're going to want to take a little bit of the fabric out here. The shape is really up to you, and you can take out as little or as much fabric as you like, but I suggest you start small and increase your amount from there. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about unlined banyans because basically you just have to sew the seams and fell the seams and hem it. But I will point out that the extra fabric taken from the sides can be used to create a facing at the front if you like. You can kind of see this technique on the inside of this bedgown that I made about 4,000 years ago. On to the type of collar we're actually going to use for this project. Now you can't see the back of this man's banyan, but I have a pretty good feeling, based on extant examples, that his banyan is made with what we would call today a shawl collar. To make this, you don't really have to measure the back of your neck, but I'm doing it just to make this a little bit more clear. Before anyone freaks out, I do want to point out that this is a heat-sensitive pen and will disappear with an iron really quickly. So I'm going to take our measurement, which was 5 inches, and line it up at the center across the shoulder where we've cut our front opening. Mark that, and then we're going to cut it. Once you've cut this, you want to open up the front. This will create a rectangular space. We're going to fill this with fabric. Please make sure to cut your insertion piece a little bit bigger than your opening. For instance, my opening is 2.5 inches by 5 inches, so the piece I'm cutting is 6 inches by 3 inches. That will give us a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around except at the top, which will be folded into the lining, and we don't have to worry about that. You're going to want to finger press under 3 of the sides and pin it in place before basting it. The top can be left raw because, as I said, it's going to be folded into the lining.
Okay, this is the part where it gets to be a little bit like guesswork. I'm not 100% sure this is how lined banyans would have been put together, but this is how I'm going to do it in order to avoid sewing the side seams twice. This is a technique you see on 18th century sleeves, so we're going to go with it.
You're going to lay your banyan flat with the outside fabric right side to right side, and then take the lining and lay it on top, wrong side to wrong side. See that sleeve seam right there? Yeah, I didn't do this. I did this completely upside down and had to repin the whole thing. Don't be me. The trick here is to only attach one half of the lining, so that when we've done the seam with 3 layers of fabric, we can then take the other half and fold it over the seam to create a nice clean finish. You don't have to line your banyan this way. I have no proof that this is how they were done. This is just how I'm doing it. I highly suggest that when you're pinning your lining in place, you're using the back half, which is the piece that will have the shawl collar inserted. That will make it a lot easier to line things up later. You're going to insert the piece in the neck just how you did with the outside fabric by pinning it into place and slip stitching. Once you've sewn up your side seams with the 2 layers of the fashion fabric and 1 layer of the lining, you can go ahead and start to encase your raw edges. For those counting, I went ahead and did a running back stitch for the entire side seam, except for the underarm area where I did a very tight back stitch. It's the only part of the garment that's going to take any strain at all. I'm hoping that because this sleeve is a small area, you're able to see what I mean by encasing the raw edges by only attaching one half of the lining to the seam. If not, that's fine. I'm sorry. Like I said before, you are totally free to either not line this at all, which would be a lot easier, or to line this in the way that you want. If you do use this method, once you've arranged your fabric how you like it, you want to slip stitch it into place. Several hours of stitching later, you may be ready to hem your garment. The only tricky area is around the seams, where you sort of have to make a fabric sandwich, which I failed miserably at filming. Everywhere else, you're going to just fold under the raw edges all the way around the garment and baste into place, and then slip stitch again. Several hours of stitching later, you will have yourself the most ridiculous and luxurious bathrobe you have ever seen. Even more so if yours is made out of silk, but desperate times. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. It's my first one, so I'm sure I've forgotten a few things. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions at all. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you feel like it, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching. You may be wondering, Kate, why are you hand sewing the seams of this thing that's going to be completely invisible because you're lining it?